There is a silence in human history, a long, breathless silence where entire chapters have been gently torn from time. In this space between memory and myth, we find ourselves standing once more upon the sands of ancient Sumer, not as conquerors or scholars, but as listeners. Beneath the dust lies the world's first epic, not as a legend, but as a testimony, a sacred record carved in clay, echoing the voice of a king who dared to confront the only man left alive after the world was drowned. A man who watched the sky fall and the oceans rise. It is a journey that leads not just to ancient kings, but to the beings they worshipped, celestial architects the Sumerians called the Anunnaki. In their own writings, these were not gods of love or wisdom. They were rulers, engineers, designers of our kind, not shaped from divine affection, but crafted to serve, to toil, to fear. Their power was tethered to a presence in the heavens, a celestial body long feared and misunderstood. Nibiru, not a fantasy, not a myth, but a cosmic truth written in scar and stone. The real terror we will find is not that something might return, but that something already came. For embedded in our planet's own skin is a wound 13,000 years old, a planetary trauma etched by a storm of fire from the sky. Comets that seared the clouds, boiled the oceans, and silenced an entire civilization, one so sophisticated we now recall it only through fractured legends and half-whispered myths. This is no speculative story. This is not a story of what might have happened. This is the reconstruction of what did. Before we journey further, I invite you to slow your breath. Let the world fall quiet. This channel, History to Sleep, is not here for spectacle. It is here for remembrance. For those listening late into the night, wherever you are in the world, I'd love to know, what time is it where you are? Tell me in the comments below. And though visuals may drift across the screen as we speak, you do not need to see them to feel the truth of this story. You only need to listen and to remember. Tonight we begin not with imagination, but with evidence. A document, real, tangible, that blends the sacred, the political, and the poetic. The Sumerian king list, it is here, in clay tablets buried across the plains of modern Iraq, that the scribes of old attempted to draw an unbroken chain from the first breath of kingship to their own present moment. And in that chain, forged across dynasties and floods, we find a name that refuses to remain myth: Gilgamesh. The Sumerian king list does not separate what is real from what is miraculous. It simply breathes both into one continuous stream of memory. Before the flood, it speaks of kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years, timelines that defy comprehension. But after the deluge, the reigns begin to shrink. They bend toward plausibility. And it is in this narrowing of years that Gilgamesh appears, no longer a figure of fantasy, but a name etched into the sequence of history. The list grants him 126 years, not an immortal span, but still extraordinary. Yet what matters more than the number is the placement. He is listed among those rulers corroborated by other inscriptions. In this way, the tablets whisper, Gilgamesh was not only sung in epics, he was remembered as a king. There exists a deeper proof, one far less poetic but far more intimate, a record of construction. The Tumal inscription. It is a chronicle, not of war, not of conquest, but of building, of stone laid upon stone in service to the goddess Ninlil in the sacred city of Nippur. Within its lines it names Gilgamesh, and it names his son, not in metaphor, not in legend, but in function, as builders. This was no divine parable. This was a report of work done, a record of a wall raised, a priesthood honored, a family remembered. Elsewhere, carved into stone smaller than the palm of a hand, archaeologists have found seals, tiny cylinders rolled across wet clay like a signature. Some bear inscriptions like Servant of Gilgamesh. These modest relics speak volumes. They hint at a functioning court, an administration, a king who issued commands, a ruler with subjects and staff. Even in the quiet centuries that followed, His name lived on, echoed in the naming of children, whispered in the memory of families who called their sons Gilgamesh in reverence, much like the name David or Alexander would carry weight in later lands. But if the man was real, then so too must be the world that held him, and that world was Uruk. Uruk was no village pressed into clay. It was not a myth made solid. It was the prototype, the template, the spark of the city itself. Set upon the fertile banks of the ancient Euphrates, what is today Warka, Iraq, Uruk became in its prime the largest city on Earth. Imagine more than 6 square kilometers of humming life, an expanse greater than Athens in its golden age or Florence at its peak. Its population may have reached 80,000 souls. It was a gathering not of huts but of aspirations. A convergence of voices, crafts, and ideas that redefined what it meant to live together. And it was here, around 3200 BCE, that writing was born. Not as poetry, not as prayer, but as record-keeping. Pictographs scratched into clay for the purpose of grain, beer, and livestock, ledgers of sustenance and supply. It was accounting, not artistry, that gave birth to language. From these early marks, the world's first true script would emerge, cuneiform, and in time it would be used not just to track food, but to record laws, history, dreams, and epics. Among the most unassuming discoveries in Uruk were the beveled rim bowls. Tens of thousands have been unearthed, uniform, crude, mass-produced. Their purpose? Likely to measure and distribute rations. Clay bowls handed to laborers in exchange for toil. In their simplicity, they whisper of a society vast and ordered, a central authority that not only commanded, but fed. And command it did, for the Epic of Gilgamesh begins and ends with the praise of the walls of Uruk. Towering, circular, unbroken, legend speaks of their splendor and archaeology confirms their existence. A fortified rampart nearly 10 kilometers in length, over 900 semicircular towers rising from its curve. Kiln-fired brick pressed into service by countless hands. To build such a thing was not a dream, it was a demand, one that only a figure of great power could issue, a king burdened with both vision and fear. Within those walls, 2 sacred centers pulsed like twin hearts. The Eanna district, seat of the goddess Inanna, held temples of unimaginable scale, decorated with mosaics of clay cones. Beside it stood the Anu Ziggurat, a sacred terrace crowned by the White Temple, raised high to honor the sky god Anu. These were not merely sites of worship, they were engines of the state. Workshops hummed beneath them, granaries stood full, scribes etched the future in wet clay. Faith and governance entwined. To govern such a place was not the work of a myth. It was the burden of a mind, shaped for administration, inspired by divinity and pressed by survival. Yet even this may not be the beginning. For some whisper that Uruk was not a creation, but a continuation. That its precision, its grid-like planning, its sudden leap in technology were not born anew, but remembered, inherited. That Gilgamesh, the builder king, was not the originator but the heir. Fringe scholars, often dismissed by academia, propose that what we see in Uruk is not invention, but renaissance. That the knowledge to raise such a city came not from divine inspiration, but from an earlier chapter, one lost to flood and fire. In this theory, Gilgamesh did not emerge alone. He walked in the shadow of giants, kings and engineers from a forgotten age. Whether you believe this or not, one truth remains. The physical city of Uruk, with its walls, its temples, its bureaucracy, is real. It is carved into the earth, and it bears witness to the presence of someone, a leader with the vision and authority to marshal it all into being. And in its center, baked into its bricks, echoed in its poems, is a single name, Gilgamesh, a man perhaps, a myth certainly, but most powerfully both. But what does it mean to live beyond the body, to transcend the limitations of stone and breath and step into the realm of story, of symbol? The name Gilgamesh does not merely survive in inscriptions or walls. It is immortalized in something more fragile and yet far more enduring: clay tablets. Clay, shaped by hand, softened by water, and marked by stylus into wedges, cuneiform. The voice of the ancient world, preserved not through ink or scroll, but through fire. These were the hard drives of a lost civilization, and in a strange cosmic irony, it was destruction that preserved them. Libraries built to house wisdom were consumed by flames, and in that fire the soft clay hardened. They were baked into ceramic, durable, eternal. Our modern devices fail in decades. These survived millennia. The Epic of Gilgamesh, our oldest known long-form story, was literally forged in the ashes of collapse. For thousands of years this story slept, its voice silenced by time. Until, in the 19th century, within the ruins of Nineveh, the library of King Ashurbanipal yielded tens of thousands of broken tablets. At the British Museum, a quiet man, George Smith, a banknote engraver by trade and a self-taught linguist by passion, began the sacred task of putting them back together, one symbol at a time. Then, in 1872, a breath was drawn that echoed across the world. Smith discovered a tablet containing a story of a divine flood, a man warned in secret, a vessel built to carry life, and birds sent out over drowning waters. It mirrored the biblical story of Noah. But this one came first, a full millennium earlier. The room where he read it fell silent. Even the Prime Minister sat in stunned stillness. What had just been unearthed was not a story. It was a challenge, a tremor through the very foundation of Western thought. The version he found, known as the Standard Babylonian Edition, was compiled around 1200 BCE by a scribe named Sin-Leqi Unini. But he was not its author, he was a collector, a weaver, drawing from a lineage of Sumerian poems about Gilgamesh that had already echoed for 1,000 years. Through his hands, fragmented songs became a unified river of narrative. What had been heroic fables were shaped into a reflection, a mirror of the human soul. And at the center of it all stood Gilgamesh. Not a god, not a man, something else. 2/3 divine, 1/3 mortal. This ratio, peculiar, poetic, defined him. He bore immense strength, radiant beauty, and uncommon wisdom. Gifts from his divine mother, Ninsun, the wild cow of the steppes. But his mortal third was an anchor, a weight, a whisper of death he could never silence. At first, Gilgamesh is not noble, he's not kind, he is a storm, a tyrant, a sovereign whose power knows no boundary. The poem says, he leaves no son to his father, no maiden to her lover. He crushes his people under the burden of his strength, exhausts them with endless labor, dishonors with entitlement. And so the people cry out, not to their king but to the heavens. The gods respond, but not with punishment, with balance. From clay, the very substance of man and myth, they shape a being, a mirror, a counterweight. His name, Enkidu. Enkidu is wild, hairy, untamed, a creature of the wilderness. He lives with the animals, runs with the herds, drinks at the stream. He is nature incarnate, until one day a temple priestess, Shamhut, seeks him out, not with a sword, but with touch. Through her, Enkidu is awakened, not just to the pleasures of flesh, but to the ache of awareness. Civilization enters him like a song he cannot forget. Word of this wild man reaches Gilgamesh. He sees in him not a threat, but a challenge. The two meet in the streets of Uruk, titans. Their clash shakes the city. Brick and dust tremble, but neither triumphs. Their battle ends in breathless stillness. They look into each other's eyes and see themselves. From that moment, they are bound. Not as rivals, as brothers, as mirrors. Gilgamesh had found his equal, his heart. Together they set forth, not to conquer but to prove. They marched to the cedar forest, home of the monstrous guardian Humbaba. They face divine beasts, the bull of heaven. They defy gods, and they win. But victory has a price. The gods decree one must die. Enkidu falls ill, not in battle, not with honor, but slowly, quietly. His body betrays him, his strength fades, his breath shortens. Gilgamesh can do nothing but watch. This is the moment where myth becomes mirror, where divinity bends to the human truth of loss. Gilgamesh does not mourn like a warrior. He breaks, he crumbles, he cannot bear what he has seen. Enkidu, his friend, his other half, gone. And in that death Gilgamesh sees his own. His divine lineage cannot save him from this revelation. 1/3 of him is mortal, and that third is all he can feel. He asks, "Shall I not die as Enkidu has?" The question is not rhetorical, it is existential. It tears at the veil of eternity. So begins his second journey, not for glory, not for conquest, but for an answer. He must find the one man who escaped death, the one man whom the gods allowed to live, Utnapishtim, a survivor of the great flood, a man who holds the secret to eternal life. Gilgamesh sets off across a world that is no longer earth. It is symbol. It is soul. He travels beyond the maps into places the living are not meant to tread. He passes through the Mashu Mountains, twin peaks that cradle the sun's daily path. At their base stand guardians, scorpion men. They bar the way, but seeing his grief, they grant him passage. Beyond them lies the tunnel of the sun, a corridor of darkness, a passage of utter black that the sun itself traverses at night. He must run it, 12 double hours of blindness, before dawn comes, before the sun returns and incinerates all within. It is a race against time, a metaphor made flesh. Gilgamesh emerges barely into a radiant land, a garden where trees bear precious stones instead of fruit. Carnelian glows, lapis glimmers. It is paradise, but he is not soothed. He comes to the edge of the waters of death. There he meets Siduri, the divine alewife, a goddess of fermentation, of wisdom, of earthly things. She sees his worn face, his wild eyes. She mistakes him for a desperate man, and perhaps he is. He begs her for help. She does not offer magic. She offers perspective. "The life you seek, you will never find," she says. "The gods kept life for themselves, but they gave you something else. Fill your belly, love your child, dance, bathe, be human." Her words are soft thunder, a truth he cannot yet hold. Still he presses forward. To cross the waters of death, he seeks the boatman Urshanabi. But in his grief, in his madness, Gilgamesh destroys the very tools needed to cross. He smashes the sacred stone things. He sabotages himself. And yet, Urshanabi agrees to help. Gilgamesh cuts 300 poles, each 60 feet long, each to be used only once, so not a single drop of the waters of death touches his skin. Push by push, he moves forward. At last he sees him. Utnapishtim, not a god, not glowing, just a man. Gilgamesh pours out his soul, his fear, his failure, his longing. Utnapishtim listens, and then he tells the story. The man Gilgamesh sought, Utnapishtim the faraway, does not offer immortality. He offers memory, and the story he shares is not legend to him, it is lived. It begins in a time before time, in a city called Shurupak, a place once alive with music, markets, children. But far above, in the courts of the Anunnaki, the divine council, something stirred. The gods had grown weary. Humanity in its vastness had become too loud, too many voices, too many prayers, too many dreams rising like smoke. The world, as the gods saw it, needed silence. And so the decision was made, not to cull, but to erase, a deluge vast and final. But one god could not bear it, Enki, known also as Ea, the god of wisdom, of water, of mercy. He could not defy the council directly, so he whispered a secret to the walls. Reed wall, listen." It was Utnapishtim who heard. "Abandon your house, build a boat, seal it with pitch, take the seed of all living things." Not a vessel of escape, but a cradle of remembrance, a perfect cube, a preserver of life. He filled it not only with beasts and birds, but with craftsmen, with scribes, with fire and bread and music, fragments of a world that was about to drown. And then it came. a storm so loud that even the gods themselves recoiled. The texts say they cowered like dogs. For 6 days and 7 nights the sky fell. Earth vanished beneath black water. When the waves receded, Utnapishtim looked out. Silence, no trees, no temples, just ocean and death. Then land, Mount Nimush. The boat came to rest. He sent a dove, it returned. He sent a swallow, it returned. Then a raven. It flew away and did not return. The waters had receded. He made a fire, he offered thanks. The gods, starving without sacrifice, gathered like flies around the smoke. But Enlil, the one who had called the flood, was furious. Someone had survived. Again it was Enki who stood between man and wrath. "Do not destroy the innocent," he said. "Use plague, famine, hardship, not silence." And so Enlil relented. He touched Utnapishtim and his wife upon the forehead and said, "You shall be like the gods. You shall live forever." But it was a gift given once, never again. Gilgamesh, hearing this, feels the weight of finality. Immortality, he learns, cannot be earned. It was an accident of mercy. Not a path, not a door, just a moment. Still, he pleads. So Utnapishtim gives him a test, not of strength, but of endurance. Stay awake, 6 days and 7 nights. Gilgamesh fails instantly. Sleep takes him, as death will. And to prove it, Utnapishtim's wife bakes a loaf of bread for each day he sleeps. When Gilgamesh wakes, the loaves are laid out in front of him, some moldy, some fresh. Time has passed, and he has missed it. Gilgamesh does not rage, he weeps. But compassion still stirs. Utnapishtim's wife urges her husband to offer a parting gift. And so, Utnapishtim tells him of a plant, a thorny herb at the bottom of the sea. Not immortality, but restoration. It can make the old young again. A second chance, not an endless life. Gilgamesh dives. He ties stones to his feet, descends into the deep, and retrieves the plant. He rises from the cosmic ocean with hope renewed. But on his journey back to Uruk, he stops to bathe. He leaves the plant unattended, and from the brush, a serpent slithers out, drawn to the scent. It eats the plant, and as Gilgamesh watches in horror, the snake sheds its skin, reborn. The chance is gone. He sits beside the pool, silent. No rage, no cries, only the soft hush of acceptance. He returns to Uruk, his city, his kingdom. And as he approaches, he no longer speaks of gods or quests. He shows the boatmen Ur-Shanabi the walls, those same walls he once had built. And he says, "Look upon their foundation, fired brick, eternal work. This is what endures." His name, his deeds, his breath, it will all fade. But the city, the people, the legacy, they remain. This, then, is his immortality, not in body, not in time, but in meaning. And it is here, as the epic folds in on itself, that the deeper story begins to reveal its shape. For woven through every clay tablet, through every act and image, is the presence of something far greater than any one man, the Anunnaki. To understand Gilgamesh, to understand this world, one must understand those who shaped its sky. The Anunnaki, lords of the heavens, sculptors of fate. In the myths of Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, and Babylon, they were not distant deities of abstraction. They were personalities, powerful, proud, often jealous, sometimes kind. They walked the line between stars and soil, and they ruled with both purpose and impulse. Their name, Anunnaki, translates to princely seed or offspring of Anu, divine nobility, celestial administrators. At the apex of their court sat three: Anu, the silent sky father, vast and removed; Enlil, the enforcer, the stern breath of order; Enki, the trickster, the scientist, the friend of man. Enlil's voice was thunder. His wrath was flood. It was he who tried to silence the world. Enki's voice was a whisper to the reeds, a hand beneath drowning water. Beneath them stood others: Shamash, the sun god who guided Gilgamesh's path; Ishtar, fierce and fiery, who once offered Gilgamesh love, and when refused, sent the bull of heaven to punish him; Ninsun, Gilgamesh's mother, who read his dreams, Ereshkigal, the goddess of death, who held dominion over the silence beyond. These were not metaphors. In the eyes of the ancients, they were real. Real in power, in jealousy, in hunger, and perhaps the most haunting truth, they needed humanity, not as companions but as servants. In Mesopotamian thought, humans were not created from love. They were made to labor, to dig canals, to farm grain, to raise cattle, to feed the gods with offerings of incense, fruit, meat, and song. Temples were not just houses of worship. They were divine kitchens, storehouses for sacrifice. The myth of Atrahasis tells us that in the beginning the younger gods, called the Igigi, were tasked with the toil. And after endless years they rebelled, burned their tools, surrounded Enlil's house in protest. And so the gods crafted a replacement. From clay and blood, the goddess Nintu mixed the flesh of a slain god, Gestu, a being of intelligence, with the dust of the earth. From that mixture, humanity was born. Their essence, obedience. Their purpose, labor. To be human was to serve, to feed, to worship. The Anunnaki did not need belief, they needed tribute. And when that tribute ceased, when the floodwaters came, they starved. Like flies, they gathered around the first sacrifice Utnapishtim offered when the waters receded. This is the unsettling mirror at the heart of these myths. The gods were not saviors, they were supervisors, not absent but demanding. And in this relationship, man and deity, there was love, yes, but more often fear. And yet, within this vast pantheon, one god remained different. Enki, the whisperer, the helper, the one who gave man language, math, law, healing. He did not simply pity us, he believed in us. Which brings us to the conspiracy of modern times. Were the Anunnaki gods or something else? Some believe they were not divine beings at all, but visitors. Beings of flesh, blood, and immense knowledge, engineers from the stars. And in the ancient stories, they see more than metaphor, they see memory. There is a theory whispered in the space between archaeology and imagination, one that dares to lift myth into memory and memory into meaning. It suggests that the Anunnaki were not figments of devotion but flesh and blood beings, travelers, creators, not gods, but something more complex. And in the ancient texts, etched into tablets and sealed in temples, some claim to see the traces of this truth. In one version of this story, they did not descend from the heavens in divine silence. They came in ships, in light, in sound. They arrived not to bless, but to extract. For they had a need, gold, a metal not for wealth, but for survival, a resource that, when suspended in their own atmosphere, might preserve the life of their planet. This planet called Nibiru. According to Zechariah Sitchin, the controversial interpreter of ancient Sumerian myths, Nibiru was not a poetic metaphor. It was real. A 12th planet, unknown to modern astronomers, tracing a vast elliptical orbit around the Sun, an orbit so long it returned to our skies only once every 3,600 years. The Anunnaki, facing collapse, launched a mission. They came to Earth. They landed, it is said, in what is now southern Iraq. There they established Eridu, home in the faraway, and began to mine. But as centuries passed, the work became unbearable. The laborers, though not human, revolted. So once again, a solution was needed. The story told in the myth of Atrahasis became the blueprint. Enki, the god of science and mischief, stepped forward with a daring plan: create a new being, one fit for toil, one born of this world but shaped by theirs. They would not craft us from clay and breath alone. They would mix their own essence, DNA, with that of the evolving hominids already walking Earth's plains. They would shape a hybrid, the Lulu Amalu, the mixed worker, humanity. The tale is ancient, but its details stir modern questions. Genetic manipulation, hybridization, in vitro creation. Is it a projection of modern science into the past, or a memory of science once known, now forgotten? To believers, this explains our strange leap. How Homo sapiens, with no clear predecessor, rose suddenly with language, culture, civilization. how Sumer emerged not as a slow build, but as a bloom. Language, cities, astronomy, law, all at once. The myths in this telling are not fables, they are records, garbled, dressed in metaphor, but records nonetheless. The Anunnaki were not worshipped because they were invisible gods. They were worshipped because they were here. And then they left, but the stories remained. Sitchin's theory stretches far and wide. He connects the gods of Sumer with the Elohim of Genesis, the Garden of Eden with Eridu, the Nephilim, the sons of God who took the daughters of men, with Anunnaki princes, the flood of Utnapishtim with Noah's Ark, a single narrative, cosmic, complete. He even posits that the Great Flood was not divine punishment, but collateral damage, a result of Nibiru's gravitational pull as it returned, a cosmic disturbance that triggered tectonic collapse and glacial melt. Enlil wanted to use the moment to cleanse the earth, but Enki again whispered to man. This idea, while dismissed by mainstream scholars, captured the public imagination, because it offers something myth does not: explanation. It speaks to our yearning to feel planned, crafted, part of a story. But even as Sitchin's narrative captivated millions, a quieter revelation was unfolding, one drawn not from clay, but from ice. Beneath the glaciers of Greenland and the sediments of the sea, scientists discovered a dark fingerprint, a scar left not by myth, but by impact. Rocks, fire, skyfall. Roughly 13,000 years ago, the Earth shifted. For thousands of years, the world had been warming, glaciers melting, life returning. Then, suddenly, the climate snapped. Temperatures plummeted, ice returned, and for over 1,000 years, the Earth plunged into a new chill. This period is now called the Younger Dryas. What caused it? The leading theory: a comet. Not a single impact crater, but a barrage. An ancient cosmic shotgun blast, a field of icy fragments breaking upon our skies, bursting mid-air, raining fire. The impact set forests ablaze. The soot choked the sun. The oceans changed. The air grew cold. And beneath this black mat of soot and glass and microscopic diamonds, the bones of giants, mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, and the tools of the Clovis people gone. A mass extinction, a silence. This was not myth. This was measured. The layers do not lie. Randall Carlson, a geologist and independent researcher, argues that these cataclysms are not rare. They are cyclical, predictable. Earth, he says, crosses cosmic paths twice each year. Most times, nothing happens, but every so often we pass through the thick of it, the dense part of the debris stream. And when we do, the sky falls. He points to the Taurid meteor stream, a belt of rubble left behind by a massive ancient comet. Earth passes through it every June and November. Sometimes all is well. But hidden within are the Tunguskas, the silent ones, waiting. This theory bridges two worlds, the academic and the mythical. It offers a natural cause for a flood remembered in 500 cultures, for the burning heavens, the long night, the broken world. Some now ask, was Nibiru ever a planet at all? What if the word, translated as crossing point, wasn't a body, but a place, a celestial intersection, a moment in Earth's orbit where something terrible becomes possible? The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, names Nibiru as a station, a point of control in the sky, possibly Jupiter, possibly a solstice marker, possibly more. In this lens, Nibiru becomes not a traveler but a warning, a cosmic signpost. When we pass it, things change. Others attempt a synthesis. Perhaps a massive distant object, dark, unknown, perturbs the comet clouds, nudges fragments inward. Nibiru then becomes the shepherd of destruction, not the blade, but the hand that tips it. The science remains speculative, but the resonance is deep. Whether told by priests in temples or scientists in labs, the message echoes, we are not alone in the cosmos, and the sky is not always kind. These questions stirred most loudly in 2012, the end of the Mayan long count calendar, a date soaked in prophecy, not just of endings, but of crossings. And once again Nibiru rose. The internet pulsed with rumors of a rogue planet inbound, of crustal shifts, of bunkers in Norway, of silence from NASA. It became a global echo chamber. Videos, forums, fear, but nothing came. December 21st passed. The world remained. NASA, in an unprecedented move, had launched a campaign to calm the panic. Scientists gave interviews, wrote blogs, showed data, explained that Nibiru, if it were real, would be visible to every backyard telescope, that nothing was hiding, that gravity leaves fingerprints and no such fingerprints existed. Still, belief lingered. Because the myth was never about astronomy, it was about fear, about mystery, about the hunger for meaning in chaos. And even as the sky remained still, the earth whispered reminders: fires, floods, viruses, collapses, and always the feeling that something is being forgotten or hidden. Perhaps that is why these myths endure, not because they are literally true, but because they speak to something we feel in our bones. That history is deeper, that memory is fractured, that time is not a line but a spiral, a returning. The Epic of Gilgamesh began with grief. A man, broken by loss, searching for meaning. He went to the edge of the world, and what he found was not a cure, but a truth. That mortality is not the end, that the work of the hands, the kindness we give, the names we leave, these endure. And perhaps that is what the Anunnaki stories, alien or divine, are truly trying to tell us. That power may pass, but wisdom must be preserved, that the flood will come, but so too might a whisper, a seed, a stone marked with signs, that in the ashes of fire stories can still rise. And so we come to the final breath of this story. But even now, as we stand at the edge of its telling, the ground beneath us shifts. Because this journey, through myth, through archaeology, through fire and flood, ends not with certainty, but with a question. A quiet, unsettling question that lingers not in the mind, but in the soul. What if we are not the beginning? What if the story we know, of slow evolution, of step-by-step invention, is only a chapter? What if there was something before? And what if that something ended? It is an idea older than modern science, yet more provocative than any fiction. The hypothesis that the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the early builders of our world, did not invent civilization from scratch, but inherited it, rebuilt it, recalled it. That their sudden brilliance, writing, astronomy, city planning, sacred geometry, was not the spark of genius, but the ember of remembrance. This theory does not deny human brilliance, it honors it. But it proposes that brilliance may rise more than once. It is called the lost civilization hypothesis, and it suggests that long before the first ziggurat rose above the plain, before the first laws were etched in stone, before even Gilgamesh walked the walls of Uruk, there was something else, something we have forgotten. The flood myths, found in every corner of the globe, become more than metaphor in this view. They become memory, a cultural scar, a remembrance of a world ended by water and fire. And in this remembering, figures like Gilgamesh shift. They are no longer only kings or poems, they become bridges, echoes of those who came before. The antediluvian kings of Sumer, said to rule for thousands of years, are seen not as fantasy, but as distorted history. Their lifespans, unimaginable in human terms, may reflect a different reckoning of time, or perhaps a different kind of being altogether. The Apkallu, the seven sages, are said to have walked with mankind, bringing the arts of civilization before the flood. Were they merely mythic archetypes? Or were they the survivors, the teachers? In this view, the survivors fall into two groups. Some survive by accident, but others by design. The planners, the warners, the preservers. They would have carried not just grain and livestock, but geometry, astronomy, language. They would have wandered the post-cataclysmic earth, seeking fertile minds to plant their wisdom in, whispering the old ways, not in books, but in stone, in alignment, in sacred proportion. This theory dares to suggest that what we call the rise of civilization was not a beginning. It was a remembering, And when we turn our eyes to the structures left behind, massive, megalithic, aligned to the stars, we feel a hum, a presence, something that refuses to be dismissed. Consider Göbekli Tepe, a temple complex in modern-day Turkey, over 11,000 years old, built not by farmers or kings, but by hunter-gatherers. Circular stone enclosures, each one carved with precision and adorned with cosmic symbolism. The site was buried deliberately as if preserved for another time. It rewrites the narrative of what humans could do, and when, and it is not alone. Throughout the world, on mountaintops and ocean floors, we find hints. Stone cut too perfectly, cities where none should be, mathematics in myth, precision in story. But if such a civilization did exist, where is the evidence? The answer, say believers, lies beneath the waves. At the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose over 120 meters. Entire coastlines vanished. If the cradle of this ancient culture lay along those shores, its ruins now sleep beneath the ocean, silted, broken, silent, and the rest, perhaps shattered by the cataclysm itself, crushed by glaciers, burned by fire, forgotten by time. All that remains are the hardiest echoes, stone, star maps, story, and perhaps us. Because if they were human, however advanced, then so are we. And if they fell, then so can we. Or perhaps more hopefully, if they remembered, so can we. Some propose that the most important knowledge lost was not technological, but internal, not machines, but mind. That the ancients possessed not only stone tools and star calendars, but a deeper connection to consciousness itself. The Vedic seers of India spoke of inner realms, vast and navigable. The priests of Egypt whispered of the opening of the mouth, rituals of awakening. The shamans of South America sang of worlds behind the veil, accessed not through machines but through stillness, rhythm, plant, and breath. What if these were not superstitions? What if they were the last surviving fragments of a science now forgotten? A science not of circuits but of soul. Perhaps the greatest technology of the lost world was awareness. Not what we built, but what we were. And in this light, Gilgamesh's journey shifts once again. He was not simply chasing immortality of flesh. He was seeking something remembered, something known in the bones of the world. He faced gods, storms, death, silence. He failed. He wept. He returned. And in that return, he became something more. He did not bring back eternal life. He brought back humility, perspective, meaning. He pointed to the walls, to the city, and said, "This is what endures." In this final reflection, the epic becomes a spiritual mirror. The Anunnaki become not just beings, but metaphors. The flood becomes not just a story, but a cycle. And the great forgetting becomes a test. Because now it is we who build towers that reach the sky. We who shape the genome. We who seed the clouds and scan the stars. We who believe we are gods. And we must ask, have we truly learned the lesson? Or are we, like Gilgamesh, running again through the tunnel of night, chasing a secret we are not ready to receive? If you've come this far, listening in the quiet hours long after the world has gone still, thank you. Your presence here matters. If this story stirred something in you, consider leaving a note in the comments. Where you listened from, what time it was, what part stayed with you. And if you wish for more stories like this, tales of forgotten worlds, ancient echoes, and the deep human longing to remember, consider subscribing to History to Sleep, because somewhere beneath layers of noise and modern forgetting, there is something we are all trying to recall. Good night, traveler, and may your dreams carry you across the stars. There is something profoundly quiet beneath the ocean. Not the quiet of peace, but the hush of memory, the kind of silence that falls after a scream. The kind that suggests something is missing. For those who believe in the lost chapters of human history, the water is not just sea, it is a vault. A veil pulled gently over the bones of a world we once knew and then forgot. We ended Part 6 with the idea that after the last great cataclysm, whether caused by comet, flood, or fire, humanity was left not with answers, but with ruins, with hints, with longing, And it is beneath the ocean, they say, where the most powerful answers sleep. Because when the last ice age ended, abruptly, traumatically, the ice did not merely melt, it collapsed. Sea levels did not rise over generations. They surged. Over 120 meters of ocean swallowed the world's coastlines. And with them, perhaps, the evidence we are still searching for. Most ancient civilizations are coastal. It is where fresh water meets food, trade meets travel, life meets horizon. So if there truly was a lost civilization, one that flourished before 12,000 BCE, then most of its monuments, cities, calendars, and temples would not be found on land. They would be beneath the waves. And that is exactly what some believe we're beginning to find. Along the coasts of India, Japan, the Bahamas, and the Mediterranean, divers and sonar surveys have revealed formations that do not easily yield to nature's explanation. In the Gulf of Kambat, off the coast of western India, sonar scans in the early 2000s revealed geometric structures submerged under 40 meters of water, rectangles, grids, straight lines that stretch for hundreds of meters. Among them, artifacts, pottery shards, stone tools, even human teeth, carbon dated to as early as 7000 BCE. Mainstream science pushed back. The currents are strong there, they say. Silt moves, shapes shift, perhaps, but perhaps not. Near Yonaguni, Japan, lie the remains of what some call the Yonaguni Monument. Massive stone terraces, right angles, pillars. It appears carved, designed, aligned. Geologists argue it's a natural formation, but divers and architects continue to whisper something about it feels human. And in the Caribbean, off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas, lies the so-called Bimini Road. Large, flat stones laid in a linear path, resembling a kind of ancient breakwater or walkway. To walk it, even under the sea, is to feel the possibility of purpose. But perhaps most haunting are the patterns, the alignments, the sense that these sites, if indeed they are human-made, were not placed randomly. They echo the stars. This is where the ancient obsession with the heavens returns, not just for story or calendar, but for something more, a kind of celestial memory. Many of the oldest known sites, Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge, the pyramids of Giza, are aligned with the stars, not just vaguely, but precisely. And not just to the current sky, but to the sky as it appeared thousands of years ago. This suggests two things: that the builders had advanced knowledge of astronomy, that they wanted to anchor that knowledge in stone. Why? Perhaps because they feared forgetting, because they had already lived through a forgetting. The precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, is a 26,000-year cycle. To observe it requires generations of patient tracking. And yet it appears encoded into myths across the world. The Hindu Yugas, the Mayan long count, the Egyptian Sothic cycle, the Dendera zodiac. Each of them points to vast spans of time. Golden ages, dark ages, the rise and fall of knowledge, not as a line but as a loop. What kind of culture watches the stars for 10,000 years? A culture that has seen them fall. And it's here, between astronomy and myth, that we find something else. Something hidden not in clay or stone or sea, but in story. Because after a global disaster, when cities crumble and knowledge shatters, what survives is not language or law. It is tale, it is symbol, it is rhythm. And across the world, in hundreds of cultures, we find stories that mirror one another. A golden age lost, a flood sent by the gods, a mountain of refuge, a chosen survivor, a secret remembered. In India, it is Manu. In Greece, it is Deucalion. In the Bible, Noah. In Sumer, Utnapishtim. In Mesoamerica, Coxcox. In the Pacific Islands, Nu. In the Norse Edda, it is the frost giants who drown. How can so many people, divided by sea and time, tell the same story? One answer, coincidence. Another, archetype. But a third, more haunting, suggests memory. Carl Jung once wrote that what is forgotten is not gone, it is simply waiting. And perhaps these myths are not invention but inheritance, a kind of transgenerational trauma, passed not through DNA but through dream. Even the stories of gods, when examined closely, begin to sound like survivors. Quetzalcoatl, the bearded god of Mesoamerica, who arrived by sea bringing knowledge. Viracocha of the Andes, who taught agriculture, then vanished over the horizon. Thoth of Egypt, keeper of writing and wisdom. Enoch of the Bible, who walked with God and was no more. In each a pattern. They arrive after chaos. They teach, and then they leave. Who were they? Some say gods, others watchers. Still others say survivors of a previous world. The few who remembered. And what they taught was not always physical. It was moral, spiritual, mathematical. As though what had been lost was not just architecture or astronomy, but meaning, which leads us to the question no one wants to ask. If such a civilization did exist, and if it was lost, why? Was it cosmic accident, divine will, or was it their own doing? Many ancient texts warn not just of floods, but of pride. Atlantis, in Plato's telling, fell not by fate, but by forgetting its values. The Tower of Babel reached too high. The Nephilim corrupted the earth. The gods of Mesopotamia wiped humanity clean because their noise disturbed the divine rest. It is a chilling echo that perhaps what destroys is not the heavens, but the hubris to believe we control them. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero is not punished for war. He is broken by grief. His quest is not for conquest, but for peace. And when he returns, he does not bring back a weapon or a crown. He brings back perspective, the city, the walls, the people. This, he says, is what remains. It is a message for us. For now, because we too live in cities. We too have mastered the sky. We move mountains, edit genes, speak across oceans in light. But do we remember why? Do we understand the cost? Our ancestors watched the stars not for wonder but for warning. They measured cycles because they had lived through resets. They aligned temples because they believed the heavens speak. And when the world ended, they sang songs so that the next world would not forget. Perhaps that is the role of myth, not to entertain, but to remember what facts forget. And in that sense, even if Atlantis never existed, even if the Anunnaki were never real, even if Nibiru never crossed the sky, the story still matters. Because the danger is real. The flood still comes. The stars still move. And we, like Gilgamesh, must choose what endures. Stone crumbles. Books burn. Data fades. But story remembers. So perhaps the question is not whether there was a lost civilization. Perhaps the question is, are we next? Or are we the remembering? Because even now you are here listening. Not to a voice, but to a question older than language. What have we forgotten? And what must we now become? If this voice carried you deeper than facts, if it stirred something half buried within you, know that you are not alone. There are others across the world listening with you. At midnight, at sunrise, in silence, in longing. If you feel that echo, leave your city's name in the comments. Let us remember together. And if you wish to walk further into the forgotten, History to Sleep will be here, one story at a time. Until then, let the stars guide you home. Good night. They say you can hear the truth if you listen in the silence between stories. Not in what is said, but in what remains unspoken. And so we begin again, not with revelation, but with echoes, of voices carved in stone, of cities buried not in sand, but in time. What do we do with the knowledge that something once stood here, that before us someone else looked to the stars and built? To trace these echoes, we must go beyond the ocean, beyond the myths. We must look at what remains above the surface, at the structures that still whisper, "We were here." From the deserts of Egypt to the high plains of Bolivia, we find the inexplicable. Monoliths, megaliths, temples that defy time and technique. Pumapunku in the Bolivian Andes sits 12,800 feet above sea level. Its stones, some weighing over 100 tons, are cut with such precision that modern engineers still marvel. Interlocking H-blocks, smooth drill-like bores, 90-degree angles with tolerances less than a millimeter. How? We are told the Tiwanaku people built it around 500 AD. But the alignment, the erosion, the megalithic base suggest a far older origin, perhaps pre-flood, perhaps from a people who watched the sky fall and tried to rebuild. Further north in Egypt, the Giza Plateau continues to speak. The Great Pyramid, stripped of its casing stones, still holds mysteries untouched by time. the alignment to true north within 3/60ths of a degree, the base nearly perfectly level, the dimensions encoding the golden ratio, pi, and even the curvature of the Earth. But more than math, it is the method that eludes us. We do not know how it was built. Copper tools, ropes, sand ramps. And yet, if this was the work of a civilization born from memory, perhaps we are asking the wrong question. Perhaps they did not build to last. They built to be found. The placement, the size, the astronomical precision, none of it seems accidental. It is as though the builders wanted their work to echo across the ages, to survive flood, fire, and forgetting. Not just structures, but messages. We see this too in Göbekli Tepe, older than the pyramids by 6,000 years. A ring of T-shaped pillars carved with animal symbols and mythic scenes, buried intentionally, preserved in silence. Who were they preserving it for? There is a possibility, subtle but profound, that they were preserving it for us, that they knew the cycle would repeat. That civilization rises and falls. That knowledge is lost and found. That one day someone would return to the story and listen. So let us listen. In the carvings we find the vulture stone, pillar 43. Many now believe it records the constellations visible at the time of the Younger Dryas impact. A celestial timestamp, a warning, a record of what happened when the sky bled fire and the earth trembled. In that light, the animals are not decoration. They are code, a kind of sacred language using symbols that outlast words. This use of encoded symbols spans continents: the spiral, the serpent, the cross within a circle, the triskelion. These images appear in Sumer, in Ireland, in the American Southwest. They are burned into rock, woven into cloth, etched into bone. And they are not random. The spiral may speak of time, of the great turning, the serpent of knowledge or energy, the cross within a circle, perhaps the solstices or the four directions. In each, a deeper pattern, and within that pattern, a whisper. We remembered something once, and we must remember again. This brings us to a difficult truth, that the further back we go, the clearer the design becomes. Not simpler, but purer, as if the earliest builders were not primitive, but preservers, stewards of a knowledge older than their own. What knowledge? That the earth moves, that the sky speaks, that cycles govern all things. We see this encoded in calendars, the Mayan long count, the Hindu yugas, the Sumerian king lists. Each records cycles of rise and fall, light and dark, memory and forgetting. And in these calendars we find a date, 12,800 years ago, a cataclysm, an ending, not of the earth, but of the world as it was. It is the moment the Younger Dryas began, the moment the climate changed in a single lifetime, the moment sea levels surged and coastlines drowned. And it is the moment so many myths begin: the flood, the fire, the gods departing, the age of men beginning. What came before was buried, not just in earth, but in story. And if we listen closely, the stories are not just memories. They are maps. Gilgamesh's journey is not merely a tale of grief. It is a record of seeking, of traveling to the edge of the known world in search of the one man who remembered the flood. Utnapishtim, the Sumerian Noah, does not simply survive. He is granted immortality, but not as a gift, as a burden. He holds the memory of what was lost. And in that memory, we find our most profound inheritance. Not technology, not power, but humility. Because to remember is to understand what it means to forget. And to forget is to risk repeating what once destroyed us. So the builders built, not to conquer, but to anchor. Stone, aligned to the stars. Symbols shaped like the cycles. Myths passed in whispers and flame, in hopes that someday someone would look up, see the sky turning, and remember. Are we that someone? That depends not on what we build, but on how we listen. Because the ruins do not shout, they murmur. And only those who have stilled the noise of now can hear the truth of then. As you listen to this, perhaps in the quiet of your room or the hush before sleep, you are joining a long chain of listeners, keepers of a question. What are we forgetting? And what have we always known? There are no easy answers, but there are echoes, and echoes lead to doorways. The builders knew this. They did not leave manuals. They left mirrors so that when the time came, we would not need to be told. we would simply recognize ourselves beneath the noise, beneath the waves, beneath the forgetting, because what was true for them is true for us. The stars still turn, the sea still waits, and memory is never truly lost, only buried until we listen. Some things are not meant to be found. They are meant to be remembered. But in a world where forgetting has become survival, remembrance takes on a sacred weight. This is the story of what drifts just beneath our awareness. Not lost civilizations, but the longing they left behind. In the silence of submerged coasts and crumbling temples, that longing endures, calling out in the language of stone and stars. A drift, a sacred drift. The sea, more than any other force, holds our oldest memories, not in symbols or structures, but in absence. Look to the continental shelves. Stretching miles out from today's shorelines, these were once fertile lands, home to rivers, forests, villages, now sunken, silent. During the last glacial maximum, sea levels were 400 feet lower than today. Much of what was once coastal is now underwater, and with it perhaps the truest heart of our forgotten world. India's Gulf of Cambay. A sonar scan in the early 2000s revealed a grid-like pattern beneath the waves. Structures, streets, possible steps. Dismissed as geology, then reconsidered, then silenced again. In Japan's Yonaguni Monument, off the coast of Okinawa, we find tiered platforms and straight edges carved into the bedrock. Some say it is natural. Others say it is a sunken temple. But the question persists. Why does the sea guard these places so jealously? Is it simply erosion? Or something older than time, a covenant with the water? In myths around the world, the ocean is not just a force. It is a boundary, a keeper of secrets. The Abzu of the Sumerians, the Nun of the Egyptians, the primordial sea in Genesis. The churning chaos before order. Always the sea comes first, and always the sea returns. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it is by sea that Utnapishtim survives. His ark, cast into the flood, drifts toward survival, but it also drifts toward isolation. He is kept apart, set aside, a witness, living proof that memory comes at a cost. This theme recurs in every deluge story, that survival is not just physical, it is spiritual, a burden of remembrance, and that those who live to tell the tale often tell it in silence. Because the world that comes after does not want to remember. The new order must forget. It must bury the past beneath progress, myth, mockery. But not all forget. In the Andes, Inca legends speak of Viracocha, bearded, tall, arriving after the flood to restore order. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl does the same. In Polynesia, Maui pulls islands from the sea. In Dogon myth, the Nomo emerge from the waters, bringing knowledge. Always after the flood. Always with memory in hand. These are not random stories. They are reflections of something deeper. A pattern, a cycle, a sacred drift of memory through myth. We see this in the architecture of the ancients. Not only what they built, but where. Sacred sites across the world are often placed on energetic ley lines or aligned to solstices, equinoxes, lunar standstills. Why? Because to them, memory was not just about past events. It was about connection. To the cosmos, to the earth, to cycles larger than one life. They anchored their civilizations to the stars, so when the flood came again, at least the heavens would remain. We can see this in the Temple of Karnak, the stone circles of Nabta Playa, the alignments of Teotihuacan. These were not arbitrary. They were messages across epochs. This is what the sacred drift means. That memory is not a fixed thing. It moves, shifts, adapts. Like a current below the surface, it carries truth forward, waiting for the next shore. Our ancestors did not trust writing alone. They trusted geometry, celestial alignments, stone placed with intention. Because these do not decay like parchment. They do not vanish with language. They endure, but only if we know how to see. This is why the builders left symbols, not instructions. Why myths use metaphor, not measurements. They were not being vague. They were being timeless. To survive a cataclysm is one thing. To ensure your story survives is another. So they embedded memory into the sacred, into rituals, into the rhythm of planting and harvesting, into pilgrimage. The Hebrew calendar begins in the fall, on Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. Why the fall? perhaps a remembrance of the flood that began then. The Egyptians marked Sirius's rising as the start of the Nile's flood, a celestial signal for survival. The Mayans used the Tzolk'in, 260 days, matching gestation, a calendar of the body and the cosmos. These are not just systems, they are echoes of something lost, something once known intimately, then hidden. The sacred drift is not just about structures and dates, it is about meaning. We do not remember facts, we remember feelings, and in every myth that speaks of loss there is a quiet grief, a knowing that something beautiful was shattered, not by malice but by time. And in every ritual there is a promise, that we will not let it be lost again. Perhaps this is why the ancients held the past with reverence, because they knew it was fragile, like a song passed by memory. Change one note and the meaning is gone. In today's world, we treat memory as data, but to them it was sacred. Every stone placed, every story told, every star watched, it was all part of the covenant. To remember, to carry forward, to never forget the cost of forgetting. And now we stand at the edge again. The ocean is rising, the ice is melting, the earth is shifting. We are not facing the same cataclysm, but we are facing a moment where memory matters. Will we look to the past for guidance, or treat it as myth? Will we anchor to cycles, or drift in chaos? The sacred drift asks nothing of us but attention, not belief, not dogma, just presence. To sit with the stories, to walk the ruins, to look at the stars and wonder, to feel the weight of silence in a place like Sacsayhuaman or Göbekli Tepe and know this was not built in haste. This was not built for utility. This was built as an offering to time, to future, to us. So what do we offer in return? Not answers, but questions. What did they see? What did they fear? What did they hope we would understand? Maybe the answer is simple, that civilizations are not built to last, but stories are. That in every age there are those who remember and those who listen. And if we listen well, we may become both. Not survivors, not rebuilders, but rememberers, carrying the sacred drift forward. Not in temples or machines, but in spirit. Because in the end, memory is not what we hold. It is what we become. When the water recedes, it leaves behind silence, a stillness so deep it feels sacred. Not because it is peaceful, but because something once living is now gone. This is where our story ends, at the edge of silence, with a final witness. His name is changed across tongues. Utnapishtim, Ziusudra, Atrahasis, Noah. But the story remains. A man chosen not because of power, but because of memory, because he would carry the story forward. We return to the Epic of Gilgamesh, not for answers, but for closure. The journey has been long, through gods and floods, through sky maps and stone calendars, through submerged lands and broken myths. But at its heart, it has always been a conversation between the past and the present, between the forgotten and the seeker. Gilgamesh finds Utnapishtim not in a temple or a palace, but in a remote, unreachable land, beyond the waters of death, on the edge of the known world. This is intentional. It is not a place. It is a threshold. To cross it, one must first shed what they believe they know. And so Gilgamesh arrives, broken and tired, not as a king, but as a question. And Utnapishtim answers not with power, but with a story. He speaks of the gods' decision to cleanse the earth, of the whispers before the storm, of the great boat sealed with pitch, of animals, of family, of fear. He speaks of the rains that came like grief, not in drops, but in walls, not for days, but for an eternity. He speaks of a mountain, Nisir, where the ark came to rest, of the dove that returned, of the raven that did not. But above all, he speaks of the moment after, when silence returned, and with it, the weight of survival. This is what matters, not the flood, not the boat, but what it means to live after the end, to walk among ruins, to bury the dead, to carry memory in a world that wants to forget. Gilgamesh hears this and realizes the truth. Immortality is not found in body, it is found in story. The great king, conqueror of cities, slayer of beasts, becomes still. He does not get what he came for. He gets what he needed. Perspective. A quietness settles in, the kind that only comes at the end of a long journey or the beginning of a new one. And so Gilgamesh returns, not triumphant, but transformed. the man who set out to defeat death, comes back as a witness to life. We too have arrived at that place. We have walked with gods and mourned their fall. We have stood in the mud of the Younger Dryas and heard the sky crack. We have watched the birth of myth from ash. We have seen how memory moves, not in facts, but in symbols, not in timelines, but in feelings. And now we must ask, what will we do with what we've seen? In the modern world, we chase knowledge. But wisdom drifts like Utnapishtim's ark, untethered. It requires stillness, reverence, the ability to see pattern, not just proof. We are taught to believe the ancients were primitive. But what if they were simply tuned to a different truth? A truth of rhythm, of repetition, of remembering. They did not build monuments for beauty. They built them to outlast forgetting. And in some quiet way they succeeded. Because here we are, still wondering, still searching, still listening. The ruins did not survive to tell us how to build. They survived to tell us how to be present, to be humble, to be in awe. As Gilgamesh stood before the gates of Uruk, he looked upon its walls and said, "See how its foundation is laid." He did not mean the stones. He meant the story. That all things pass, but the tale remains. And so this is where we leave him, and you, not with an answer, but with an invitation. To listen differently. To see myths not as fiction, but as encoded truths. To feel the flood not as history, but as inheritance. Because somewhere in our DNA there is still a memory. Of fire, of ice, of rising waters, and of the choice to carry the story forward. We are the descendants of survivors, not just of floods or famine, but of forgetting. And now we must become what they hoped we would be. Not kings, not gods, but witnesses, carriers of the sacred drift. There will be no more signs, no more tablets, no more arcs, only silence and the quiet voice within you that says, "Remember,